It cost me exactly $1,478 in destroyed mailboxes and more than $5,000 in bogus HOA fines before I finally decided I'd had enough of Karen's game. I was done playing by her rules. So, I went digging, through a dusty 40-year-old map and a long-forgotten federal law, and found something that she, along with the entire HOA board, had completely overlooked. That was the moment the real fun began. My name's Frank, and I've lived by one simple rule my entire life: measure twice, cut once. 40 years as a civil engineer taught me the value of planning, precision, and doing the job right the first time. I carried that same philosophy into retirement. My wife, Sarah, patient as a saint, and I had finally saved enough to buy our forever home. It wasn't a mansion, nothing flashy, just a solid, well-built house on 3 acres of land just outside of town. Old oak trees shaded the yard, there was plenty of space for a garden big enough to feed a small army, and it was so quiet you could almost forget the highway even existed. We called it our slice of heaven. But hidden in that slice of heaven was a thread I hadn't noticed: our property was, by the slimmest technicality, part of a newer master-planned community called Willow Creek Estates. And that thread had a name: Brenda. She was the president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, a woman in her mid-60s who drove a pearlescent white Lexus SUV and wore tennis visors indoors. From the moment we met her at the so-called welcome barbecue, I knew we were in for trouble. She had a particular kind of look, the kind that sizes you up, finds you wanting, and writes you off in the space of a single heartbeat. Our rustic, older property was a splinter in the thumb of her perfectly manicured community. Most of Willow Creek was made up of identical houses sitting on postage stamp lots. Our place didn't match, and that clearly didn't sit right with her. She approached us with a plate holding a single, sad-looking brownie and said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "It must be so much work trying to bring an older lot like this up to Willow Creek standards." Not a welcome to the neighborhood, more like a backhanded critique. That was Brenda's opening shot. The first real battle was over the mailbox. The property didn't have one when we moved in, so I went to the hardware store, bought a standard USPS-approved box and a sturdy wooden post, then spent a Saturday digging the hole, mixing the concrete and setting it perfectly. I mulched around the base and gave the post a solid thump with my fist, declaring, "This is our home." A week later, we came back from grocery shopping to find it completely obliterated, flattened. Wide tire tracks were pressed into the soft dirt on the shoulder. The post was snapped, and the box was crushed into a twisted mess, its little red flag bent into a sad metal question mark. Sarah sighed and said it was probably teenagers. I figured she was right. Random vandalism happens anywhere. So, I took a deep breath, muttered a few words Sarah pretended not to hear, and got to work again. I pulled the mangled post from its concrete footing, the metal screeching as I wrenched it free, and built a second mailbox from scratch. New post, new box, fresh bag of concrete. This time I bolted the post to the footing so it would be easier to replace if mischief struck again. I made it stronger, straighter, and better than before. I even painted the post a deep forest green to match the trim of our house. It looked sharp. Too sharp, apparently. 2 days later, a crisp cream-colored envelope with the Willow Creek Estates logo appeared in the mail slot on our front door. Inside was a formal violation notice citing Article 4, Section 2A of the Willow Creek Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. All mailbox support structures must be painted ecological beige, Pantone 7527C. My forest green was deemed non-compliant. A $50 fine had been added to my account, with 15 days to fix the violation. Ecological beige, a color so bland it could only have been dreamed up by a committee. It was the color of weak coffee, dusty cubicles, and pure resignation. The ugliest color I had ever been legally forced to use. Sarah just laughed and told me not to let it get to me. But it wasn't about the paint, it was about being told what to do on my own land by someone who seemed to take joy in making others miserable. Still, I tried to be the reasonable neighbor. I went to the paint store, ordered a quart of that beige monstrosity, and spent a Saturday morning carefully painting the post. Every brushstroke felt like it was draining the life out of me. When it was done, I took a photo, emailed it to the HOA management company, and certified my compliance. The mailbox looked pitiful, like it was ashamed to exist. It didn't last long. The following Tuesday, we came home to find the beige mailbox flattened, destroyed with the same deliberate, vehicular malice as the first one. But this time, as I knelt in the dirt examining the splintered wood, I spotted something, a tiny fleck of pearlescent white paint caught in the grain. Small as a fingernail, but unmistakable, the exact shade of Brenda's Lexus. This wasn't random. This wasn't teenagers. This was a declaration of war. My blood boiled, but I didn't let anger take over. Anger is messy. Data is clean. I needed proof. So, instead of storming over to her house, I drove to a sporting goods store and bought an $80 trail camera, the kind hunters use for tracking deer. That evening, I crossed the street to a big old oak on the edge of the common area with a perfect view of the mailbox's spot. I strapped the camera to the trunk, camouflaged it with branches, and set it to motion-triggered recording. The faint click of the shutter during testing was the sound of a trap being set. Then, for the third time, I bought the exact same mailbox and post, bolted it to the concrete footing, and painted it the ugliest, most compliant shade of ecological beige imaginable. Now, the ball was in her court. It didn't take long, less than a week. I made a habit of checking the trail cam's SD card each morning, feeling like a spy in my own neighborhood. And then, one morning, I saw it. The footage was grainy, time-stamped at 2:17 a.m., captured in that eerie black and white infrared that makes the world look like a ghost story. But the subject was crystal clear, a familiar white Lexus SUV, the same one Brenda drove every single day. It slowed as it approached my property, then made a sharp, deliberate turn. The front passenger wheel rolled directly over my mailbox with a violent crunch before correcting course and disappearing into the night without so much as a brake tap. The glare on the windshield hid the driver's face, but there was no need to see it. The vehicle, the act, and the time told the whole story. I saved the clip to a thumb drive, sealed the white paint chip in a plastic bag, and felt a surge of righteous adrenaline. This was it. Game. Set. Match. The next HOA board meeting took place in the community center's tired little conference room. It smelled faintly of stale coffee and unspoken resentment. Brenda sat at the head table flanked by her two loyal board members, a woman whose eyebrows were permanently arched in surprise and a man who looked like he could nap through a hurricane. I waited through 20 minutes of passionate debate over the acceptable height for garden gnomes before my turn came. I rose to my feet, calm and deliberate. I explained the timeline, the 3 mailboxes, the cost of replacing each one, then held up the paint chip like a piece of evidence in a courtroom. Finally, I opened my laptop and queued up the video. The room leaned forward as the SUV on screen crushed my mailbox in cold precision. When it ended, I looked straight at Brenda. Silence. She didn't flinch. She scoffed. "That could be any white SUV," she said with a wave of her hand. "There are dozens like it in this county. Are you accusing me, Frank? In a public meeting?" Her tone dripped with manufactured outrage. The sleepy treasurer chimed in, "The video's inconclusive. It's blurry. We can't act on speculation or circumstantial evidence." They refused to watch it again. My claim was dismissed on the spot. 2 days later, the counterpunch landed, delivered by certified mail. The board was fining me $500 for failure to maintain property in good repair, citing the now destroyed third mailbox, and another $250 for installing an unapproved surveillance device on what they claimed was HOA common property, the oak tree across the street. The shock quickly gave way to a slow, simmering resolve. If they were going to use their rulebook as a weapon against me, I needed something stronger, something bigger than their entire playbook. I spent the night fueled by black coffee and sheer indignation, digging through municipal codes, county ordinances, and finally federal regulations. That's where I found it, buried deep in the USPS Postal Operations Manual, Section DMM 500.8. Mailboxes are considered federal property. Their construction, placement, and access are governed by federal law to protect the security and efficiency of mail delivery. In plain English, federal law trumps the aesthetic whims of an HOA. The next morning, I drafted a letter as cold and precise as a blueprint. I quoted the exact federal statute, made it clear their actions constituted active interference with the delivery of U.S. mail, a federal offense, and attached the bill for my third destroyed mailbox. At the bottom, beneath my signature, I added 2 small letters with big consequences, CC. The second copy went straight to the regional postmaster general. A week later, I logged into the HOA's clunky web portal. The $750 in fines. Gone. No apology, no acknowledgement, just erased from the record like it had never happened. But this wasn't a victory. It was a stalemate. Brenda no longer met my eyes when she passed, but I could feel her calculating stare from behind her Lexus windshield. She was respecting the fence for now, but hunting for a hole in it. The air in the neighborhood had changed. The tension was thick enough to slice. If I'd won the legal battle for the moment, I decided it was time to win the physical one for good. And as an engineer, there was no way I'd let a suburban SUV dictate the fate of my mailbox. I began drawing up plans, not for another wooden post, but for something that could survive an apocalypse. I bought a heavy-gauge galvanized steel mailbox, the kind built for rural snowplow country. Then came 24 bags of concrete mix, rebar, and a pallet of red bricks to match our house. I poured a massive concrete foundation and built a 2x2-foot brick column around the mailbox, each layer set in mortar with slow, deliberate precision. The air was thick with the smell of wet cement and determination. When I finished, it didn't look like a mailbox, it looked like a miniature fortress. Solid. Unshakable. Untouchable. I stepped back, dust and sweat clinging to me, and thought, all right, Brenda. Let's see you take this one out. She didn't. Not in the way I expected. A few days later, I spotted her Lexus parked across the street, not passing, not lingering, but sitting still. She lifted her phone, snapped a series of photos from different angles, and drove off without a word. That silence was worse than finding the thing smashed. A week later, a shiny white truck pulled up to my curb, this one bearing the official seal of the County Public Works Department. The man in a hard hat and reflective vest stepped out with a clipboard. He was polite, even friendly, but he carried bad news. A complaint had been filed about an unpermitted structure in the county right-of-way. The mailbox itself was fine, he explained, but the brick column was technically a structure. And since it sat within 20 feet of the property line, it violated Municipal Code 114B. Brenda hadn't touched the HOA rulebook this time, she'd skipped right over it, weaponizing the county against me. The notice in my hand was clear, I had 14 days to demolish my fortress at my own expense, or the county would do it for me. The demolition notice in my hand felt heavier than bricks. The county's official seal glared back at me, sealing my defeat in black and white. My mailbox fortress, my engineering triumph, had become a monument not to victory, but to failure. I had been outmaneuvered completely, and now I stood in the street staring at my work, knowing it would be destroyed. Hundreds of dollars gone, a public loss, and I was right back at square one. It was the lowest point yet. In my small home office, I sat surrounded by the physical evidence of this whole war, for mailbox receipts, bogus HOA violation notices, and right on top, that cold demolition order. The sunlight slanted across the desk, stretching shadows over the mess like bars in a cell. Everything felt suffocating. Sarah stepped in quietly, her hand finding my shoulder. She looked at the paperwork, then at me. Her voice was gentle, reasonable. Honey, this woman is obsessed. Let's just give up on the mailbox. We can rent a P.O. box in town. It's not worth it. She was right, at least, any sensible person would agree. But as I stared at that demolition order, something hardened inside me. This wasn't about a mailbox anymore. This was about being bullied. This was about a woman who thought she could steamroll anyone who didn't fit into her perfect little kingdom. And this was our home, our forever home. No one was going to drive us out. No, I said quietly but with a steel edge. Not like this. That rejection of defeat flipped a switch in my mind. The engineer in me returned, not just angry, but focused. If I couldn't win by building, I would win by reading. I went to the hall closet and pulled out the bulky accordion file from when we bought the house. Inside was everything: title reports, inspections, loan papers, and one particularly intimidating relic, the original covenants, conditions, and restrictions for Willow Creek Estates, dated 1984. I dumped it all on the dining room table. Hours passed in a haze of dry legalese. Then, tucked in a large envelope at the very back, I found it, the original full-size plat map of the subdivision. It was a surveyor's blueprint, old and crinkled, its blue lines faded but precise. That's when I saw it. I grabbed my old engineer's scale and studied the markings. Unlike the simplified maps the HOA used, this one had a dotted line parallel to the road, set deep inside my property. It was labeled 15-foot public utility access easement. My pulse quickened. Flipping back to the CC and RS, I found the matching article, and the words nearly leapt off the page. First, that easement, a 15-foot strip of land, was designated for use by utility companies, including the USPS. Second, the HOA, not individual homeowners, was legally responsible for the maintenance and upkeep of all such easements. The implications slammed into me. The very ground my mailbox sat on, the spot Brenda kept targeting, was legally the HOA's responsibility. Every fine they'd slapped me with for failing to maintain it was fraudulent. And the knockout punch? Any structure related to a public utility, like a mailbox, within that easement fell under municipal utility codes, not HOA bylaws. I had been fighting her on her terms, in her territory. But the whole time, I'd been standing on ground governed by an entirely different authority. Leaning back, I stared at the spread of old documents like a battlefield map. Slowly, a grin spread across my face. The game had changed. I shifted from defense to offense. But a good engineer knows when a project needs a team. My first call was to Old Man Fitz, a retired county surveyor who lived down the street. Fitz hated the HOA, and Brenda, with a passion that burned hot and steady. I showed him the plat map. He squinted, slid on a dusty pair of reading glasses, and then grinned. "Well, I'll be damned, Frank. She's been harassing you over land she's supposed to be mowing." The next day, he showed up with his transit and tripod, measured the property, and drove a wooden stake into the ground exactly 15 feet from the road. "That's the line," he declared. Official. The next step was legal firepower. I found Alicia, a property lawyer who specialized in fighting overreaching HOAs. She was sharp, worked on a flat fee, and her eyes lit up as I laid out the situation. She wasn't just a lawyer, she was a giant slayer. With Fitz on speakerphone, we had a strategy session. Alicia's plan was as clean as it was ruthless. First, we go on the attack. We send the HOA a formal invoice, every mailbox, every bag of concrete, every brick, demolition costs, and my labor billed at a contractor's rate. All cited under the specific CCNR clause that made them responsible. Second, we apply for the new mailbox, but not through the HOA. Fitz cackled at this one. We'd go straight to the county planning and zoning office and file a permit for a federally compliant mail access utility point with an official property survey monument. That would put it entirely under municipal and utility authority, making HOA interference irrelevant. And last, the hardware itself. I called my old friend Dave, who ran a custom metal shop. "Dave," I said, How would you like to build something that makes Alexis cry for its mommy? Dave laughed. Send me the specs. The specs were beautiful. We called it the Sentinel, a quarter-inch welded steel mailbox anchored in 4 feet of rebar-reinforced concrete, crowned with a brass survey plaque from Fitz's County Contact. Its prow was angled like an icebreaker ship, designed not just to survive impact, but to send every ounce of that energy straight into its anchor, maximizing the damage to whatever dared hit it. The final touches for the Sentinel were nothing short of poetic justice. Around its base, I planned a small raised garden bed filled with the nastiest, thorniest native succulents and pyracantha bushes I could find. It would be beautiful, yes, but also an unforgiving welcome mat for anyone foolish enough to get too close. The plan was airtight, the team assembled, and the first moves began in silence. Alicia drafted an invoice for just over $3,000, itemized costs for every destroyed mailbox, paint, bricks, concrete, demolition, and my labor calculated at a professional contractor's rate. It went to the HOA via certified mail, signature required. There would be no, "it got lost in the mail" excuse this time. The very next day, Fitz and I delivered the finalized permit application directly to the county planning and zoning office. The clerk, a stern woman in formidable glasses, reviewed every detail, Fitz's surveyor stamp, the utility classification, and the federal mail statutes Alicia had referenced, before stamping it, approved, with a satisfying catch chunk. The only outward sign of what was coming was a lone orange flag staked in my lawn, marking the exact spot for the new monument. I could only imagine Brenda's expression when she signed for that certified letter and unfolded a professional invoice billing her own HOA for her acts of vandalism. This wasn't some petty homeowner complaint she could sweep away in a rigged meeting, this was a direct, legal, and financial strike against her power. Brenda's counterattack came fast. She stormed into the county office to protest the permit, likely expecting her usual intimidation tactics to work. But Alicia had already warned the clerk and made sure the paperwork was airtight. The county's response was simple and final: the project was a registered utility access point and survey marker, fully compliant with municipal and federal regulations, outside the HOA's jurisdiction. Her objection was noted, and immediately dismissed. Blocked at the bureaucratic level, Brenda turned to her last desperate weapon, public opinion. That evening, the HOA's community Facebook page lit up with a post dripping in manufactured outrage. In all caps, she warned neighbors about the industrial eyesore being built on my property, claiming it would lower home values and force dues to rise because of my supposed legal attacks on the board. It was a masterpiece of fearmongering, designed to isolate me before the first shovel even hit dirt. The comments section became a battlefield. Some of her loyalists parroted her outrage, but others began to question her narrative. All this over a mailbox? Didn't you make him repaint it 3 times? One neighbor asked. Another pointed out that Sarah and I had been nothing but kind since moving in. The cracks in her influence were showing. Not everyone was buying the Kool-Aid. When installation day came, we made sure it was unforgettable. At 8 a.m. sharp, Dave's fabrication truck rolled up, its small crane ready for the job. Behind it came the rumbling drum of a ready-mix concrete truck. Fitz, dressed in his official surveyor's vest, looked like the proud general of a battlefield. The noise and spectacle drew out curious neighbors, some pretending to garden or walk their dogs while keeping a close eye on the scene. It didn't take long for Brenda to appear, her white Lexus screeching to a halt, half on the road and half on my lawn. She leapt out, phone recording, fury etched into her face. She shouted threats, declared the project forbidden, and even tried to bribe Dave to stop. His response was a laugh and a flat refusal. True to form, she dialed the sheriff, reporting illegal destruction of property, in dramatic fashion. 15 minutes later, 2 deputies arrived, professional and alert. I was ready. Without a single raised voice, I handed over a folder containing the county-stamped permits, the original plat map, and Alicia's card. The deputies examined the documents, glanced at the survey marker, and saw the professional crew. One raised his eyebrows slightly, then nodded. Approaching Brenda, the lead deputy delivered the verdict in a calm, firm tone. The work was fully permitted, legally authorized, and within a registered utility easement. Her HOA rules held no authority here. The deputy's voice cut through the tension. Ma'am, your HOA rules do not override county permits or federal utility regulations. This is a legitimate work site. If you continue to interfere, you could face charges for obstructing a permitted project. Please return to your vehicle and allow these men to work. In front of a dozen neighbors, Brenda's power crumbled. She stood there, speechless, face flushed an angry shade of red. Without another word, she turned, climbed into her Lexus, and sped off. Fitz gave me a slow, knowing wink. The Sentinel was going up. The black steel monument soon stood at the end of my driveway, tall, immovable, and defiant. We had won the battle. Now it was time to win the war. When the next HOA meeting rolled around, the community center was packed. The showdown with the sheriff had been the talk of the neighborhood, and now everyone wanted to see how this ended. Sarah and I walked in with Fitz, greeted by nods and quiet smiles from people we barely knew. For the first time, it felt like the tide was turning. Our lawyer, Alicia, arrived looking sharp and in control, a heavy leather briefcase in hand. She took a seat behind us, her expression calm but focused. The trap was set. At the front of the room, Brenda and her two loyal board members sat looking flustered but still clinging to their authority. She called the meeting to order and launched into a speech about an emergency bylaw regarding mailbox aesthetics and uniformity. Every word was aimed directly at me, a last-ditch attempt to outlaw the Sentinel retroactively. Just before she could call for a vote, I stood. Point of order, Madam President. Brenda snapped, "You are out of order, Frank." But Alicia's voice rang out. "Actually, he's not." She rose, walked to the front, and placed 4 thick spiral-bound packets on the table, one for each board member, and one for the recording secretary. "This," Alicia said, "is information the board needs to review before proceeding." The board members hesitated, then opened the packets. The first pages showed our invoice for over $3,000, now stamped in red, 30 days past due, notice of intent to file lien. The treasurer's face drained of color. The next section contained crystal-clear photographs Fitz had taken of the brand-new 6-foot vinyl fence Brenda had installed around her patio, accompanied by highlighted HOA regulations explicitly banning fences of that height and material. It was undeniable proof of her own violations. Then came the final blow, a legally vetted petition demanding Brenda's immediate recall as president for fiscal mismanagement, harassment, and selective enforcement of HOA rules. The signatures filled page after page, over 60% of the neighborhood, far beyond the threshold needed. And at the very end, the cherry on top, a letter from the U.S. Postmaster General's office, commending the Sentinel for its security, durability, and full compliance with federal regulations. Brenda was pale and silent, staring at the names of her own neighbors who had turned against her. The other board members pushed their chairs back, clearly distancing themselves. Then, from the back of the room, a man's voice rang out, "I move to hold the recall vote right now." "Seconded," came the reply from 3 different people. The ayes thundered through the room. The vote was unanimous. Brenda sat frozen, the gavel still in her hand, a queen in a kingdom that had vanished beneath her. Without a word, she stood and walked out. 2 months later, a for sale sign went up in her yard. Soon, the Lexus was gone, replaced by a moving truck. She never returned. A new board took over, led by the neighbor who had called for the vote. Their first act was to cut me a check for the full $3,000 owed. Their second was to dig through the HOA's finances, where they found Brenda had been hoarding a surplus to fund a management company that enforced her every whim. That company was fired. The surplus funded a new playground the community had wanted for years. The sound of children's laughter replaced the constant undercurrent of tension. The Sentinel became a local legend. Delivery drivers swore kids tapped it for good luck on their way to school. Neighbors used it as a landmark, turn left at the indestructible mailbox. With the money from the invoice, Alicia and I created the Homeowner Advocacy Project. Twice a year, we host free workshops at the public library, teaching people how to read property plats, understand their CC and RS, and navigate board meetings with parliamentary precision. We arm them not with anger, but with knowledge. Now, in the evenings, Sarah and I sit on our porch, watching neighbors stop and chat by the very mailbox that once divided the street. It's a quiet reminder that sometimes standing your ground changes more than your own life, it can change the whole neighborhood. It was never really about the mailbox. It was about the right to live in peace, to enjoy your home without interference. We fought for that peace. And in the end, everyone got to share it.